first cut is never the loud one. It's not the slammed door or the shouted word. It's the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. It's the word complicated. It's your own son looking straight through you as if you were made of glass. I learned this on the day I became a ghost at my own child's wedding. The morning of Brandon's wedding, I stood before my modest closet, a battlefield of quiet desperation. My fingers finally settled on a simple navy sheath dress and a single strand of pearls. Over it, I draped the soft gray cashmere shawl my late husband, Michael, had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was the last gift he'd ever chosen for me himself. His hands already growing frail, his eyes still full of a fierce, enduring love. I wrapped it around my shoulders now, hoping it would armor me against the day. It smelled faintly of cedar and a memory of his cologne. I hoped the ensemble whispered, respectable, elegant, composed. But a treacherous voice in my head, one that sounded suspiciously like my new daughter-in-law, Vivian, whispered that it probably screamed, outdated, trying too hard. The ceremony was at a sprawling estate on the edge of Denver, a place of such pristine, manicured beauty. It felt more like a museum than a home. My heels crunched unnaturally loud on the immaculate gravel path, a sound that seemed to announce my intrusion with every step. I clutched my small beaded purse like a life raft, my knuckles white. Stone fountains gurgled placidly. Manicured hedges stood at rigid attention. Everything was polished to a high, intimidating shine that smelled faintly of money, chlorine, and thousands of white roses. I saw the wedding coordinator before she saw me, a young woman with a sleek blonde bob and a clipboard held like a shield. She was the general of this beautiful war, and I was a rogue civilian. As I approached, her bright, efficient smile faltered, freezing in a peculiar halfway curve. It was a smile I knew well, the kind people offer when they don't know where to seat someone who doesn't quite fit. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes scanning past my shoulder, already looking for someone more important. "I'm Eleanor Patterson," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Brandon's mother." Her eyes flicked back to me, performing a swift head-to-toe assessment. "Oh, right. You must be Brandon's mother." She consulted her clipboard, tapping a perfectly manicured nail against the paper. "The seating list is complicated today? Complicated." The word landed in the pit of my stomach like a stone. In my 65 years, I had learned that complicated never meant a happy surprise. It always meant, "You're not going to like this. Please don't make a scene." "Of course," I murmured, the good guest, the accommodating mother. I was waved through, a dismissed subordinate. I followed the path towards the sound of laughter and the soft, elegant strains of a string quartet. The ceremony was to be held in a vast garden, chairs draped in white linen facing an archway, drowning in a waterfall of white lilies and blush roses. The air itself seemed wealthy, thick with the scent of blooms and the low, confident hum of expensive perfume. I saw Vivian's family first. Her mother, Celeste, was a vision in silver satin, her hair a sleek, impossible helmet of polished silver. She was holding court, surrounded by a coterie of women who looked carved from the same marble of wealth and assurance. They moved with a practiced grace, their laughter a melodic, chiming sound that felt both inviting and exclusive. When Celeste's eyes, a cool, assessing blue, landed on me, they didn't warm. They simply measured. Her head tilted, a minuscule movement that accomplished a full assessment and dismissal in one smooth, practiced motion. "Eleanor, right?" she said, her voice a cool, clear bell. "Brandon mentioned you might come." Might come? The phrase was a deliberate, tiny dagger, as if my attendance were an uncertainty, a mere possibility in the grand, meticulously planned script of this day, as if I hadn't RSVP'd the moment the invitation, thick and creamy as butter, had arrived in my modest mailbox. "Yes," I said, forcing a softness into my tone that I was far from feeling. "I wouldn't miss it." Celeste offered a thin, perfunctory smile that didn't disturb the perfect architecture of her face. Of course. And then she turned, her back a wall of impenetrable silver satin, her attention already returned to her friends. The conversation was over. I had been dealt with. A familiar loneliness, one I'd carried like a second shadow since Michael's death, tightened its grip around my heart. I scanned the crowd for Brandon, my boy. My Brandon. Well, not a boy anymore. At 35, he was a marketing executive. The last of his boyish softness hardened into the confident, clean lines of a man who belonged in this world of crystal and capital. I remembered him at our Formica kitchen table, a teenager with ink-stained fingers and a head full of dreams, drawing elaborate comic strips and vowing he'd never forget where he came from. "We're a team, Mom," he'd say, his mouth full of the chocolate chip cookies I'd just baked. But that was before the promotions, before Vivian, before this new, gleaming life with its unspoken rules and polished, unforgiving surfaces, when I finally found him, standing near the aisle in a suit that undoubtedly cost more than my monthly rent. My heart gave a painful, familiar lurch. He looked so like Michael in his prime. The same strong jaw, the same way of holding his shoulders, a quiet strength that had always made me feel safe. He was laughing at something one of his groomsmen said, his face relaxed and happy. My heart swelled with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was my son, my beautiful boy. I lifted my hand, a small tentative wave, a signal from my world to his. His eyes caught mine. For a fraction of a second, there was a connection, a flicker of recognition, a hint of the boy he used to be. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his gaze slid away, over my head, as if I were a stranger who'd waved by mistake, and minor interruption in his glorious day. It was a glance that lasted less than a second, but it hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't anger or malice. It was nothingness. It was an erasure. A young woman with a headset materialized beside me, her expression professionally pleasant. "Mrs. Patterson?" "Yes," I said, my voice feeling thick. She checked her clipboard, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're seated in row J. That's, toward the back, right behind the photographer's section." "The back?" The words escaped before I could stop them. A breathy, wounded sound. I tried to corral my voice to make it calm, neutral. "I'm the groom's mother." The woman's smile flickered, a faulty light bulb struggling to stay on. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. But the front rows are reserved for immediate family and VIP guests." She offered a sympathetic yet firm look. "I'm so sorry. Immediate family." The irony was a bitter pill I was forced to swallow whole. I wanted to laugh, a wild, hysterical sound that was building in my chest. Or maybe I wanted to scream. I changed his diapers. I held his hand through stitches and heartbreaks. I am his immediate family. But I did neither. I simply nodded, a mute puppet of compliance. I followed her, a condemned woman, through the rows of chairs. It was a walk of shame in slow motion. I passed faces I didn't know. Vivian's co-workers with their sharp, fashionable glasses and artful tattoos. Golf buddies with booming, confident laughs. Old college friends sharing nostalgic smiles and inside jokes. Every step felt like being sanded away, my significance diminishing with each row. A, B, C. The letters marched on, a countdown to my own irrelevance. I was a ghost walking through the vibrant land of the living. When we reached row J, my heart sank into the soles of my uncomfortable shoes. It wasn't just the back. It was behind a tall, ornate column, swathed in more of those endless white flowers. Tucked beside it, almost as an afterthought, was a simple cold metal folding chair. Its utilitarian form was a stark, humiliating contrast to the padded linen-draped chairs ahead. The petals of the massive floral arrangements brushed against my shoulder as I sat down. A gentle, fragrant mockery. From here, the bride and groom were distant, beautiful figurines in a live-action diorama. The photographers, with their massive lenses and bustling, self-important energy, were a constant obstruction. their chatter and the occasional blinding flash of light, overlapping the soft, romantic music from the string quartet. I was an audience of one, hidden in the shadows, my presence an inconvenient secret. The ceremony began. Everyone rose as a collective as Vivian appeared at the end of the aisle, a vision in lace and diamonds, radiant and utterly untouchable. Brandon's face was transformed, glowing with an admiration and love that made my chest ache, with a confusing mix of joy and profound sorrow. I wanted to be happy for him. I truly did. I wanted to feel nothing but the pure, unadulterated joy a mother should feel at this moment. But all I could feel was this quiet, humming ache, a sorrow that didn't shout or rage, but instead settled deep into my bones, cold and heavy. As the vows began, soft and earnest, I caught fragments of whispers from the row behind me, carried on the perfumed air. Who's the lady in the back all alone? In the Navy. I think she's with catering. Or the florist. No, I heard she's his mother. Really? His mother? Why would she sit there? Their words were polite, curious, not meant to be cruel. But they felt like gentle, precise knives, slicing away the last vestiges of my composure. I folded my hands in my lap, my short, neat nails pressing sharp, deliberate crescent moons into my own palms, until the physical sting overshadowed the emotional one. I focused on that pain, an anchor in a sea of humiliation. I told myself not to cry. Not here, not now, not where Celeste's sharp eyes might see and feel vindicated. When the officiant asked, "And does anyone here present object to this marriage?" a nervous, knowing laugh rippled through the guests. A wild, impossible impulse seized me. I almost wanted to raise my hand, not because I objected to the marriage, but because I objected to this. I objected to being made invisible in my son's life. I objected to the silent dismissal, to the polite cruelty of the back row, to the metal chair that felt like a throne of judgment. I glanced toward the front. Celeste was dabbing her eyes delicately with a lace handkerchief, a perfect picture of maternal grace and bittersweet joy. She glanced back once over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. It was a look that lasted only a moment, but it was long enough to confirm that I was exactly where she had expected me to be. Out of sight, out of mind, a satisfied, almost imperceptible nod, and she turned back to the spectacle. When the couple kissed, the entire garden erupted in cheers and applause. I clapped too, the sound soft and hollow in my palms, the polite, muffled clap of a ghost applauding the living. After the ceremony, as people stood and drifted towards the reception hall in buoyant clusters of laughter and clinking champagne flutes, Eleanor remained seated. She pretended to be engrossed in her phone, a pathetic, transparent prop to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. The photographers, now finished with the ceremony shots, packed their expensive gear, their large cases bumping against her chair as they stepped around her, as if she were part of the scenery. An inconvenient statue, or a forgotten potted plant. A memory, bright and cruel as a shard of glass, surfaced. Brandon, age 10, his face pale with anxiety, refusing to sing in the school Christmas concert. "I'm not going up there," he'd whispered, his small hand gripping hers like a vice. "But you love to sing, sweetheart," she'd coaxed. "Not if you're down here alone," he'd said, his lower lip trembling. "You'll be up there with me. We're a team." And she had. She'd stood beside him on the rickety stage, her voice blending with his off-key tenor, their hands linked. The memory stung now, a beautiful, painful relic from a buried civilization. The bond she had taken for granted felt severed, the connection frayed to a single, fragile thread. When she finally stood, her knees protested, stiff and aching from sitting too long in the cold, unforgiving metal chair. The wind had picked up, sweeping across the courtyard and rustling the ribbons on the chairs, and sending stray petals skittering across the stone. She saw Brandon and Vivian posing for photos by the grand stone fountain, its water catching the late afternoon light. Their photographer, a man with intense energy, called out directions. "Brandon, look at Vivian!" "Adoringly, perfect. Now laugh. Natural laugh." Brandon's gaze swept the area as he turned, and for a second time, it brushed past her, quick, furtive, guilty. Then he turned back to his bride and smiled for the camera. A perfect, polished, practiced smile that didn't quite reach the eyes that had once held such easy warmth for her. She wanted to leave, to simply walk to her modest sedan, drive away from this beautiful prison, and vanish into the comforting anonymity of her apartment. To vanish before anyone could confirm her irrelevance. But a spark of something, not pride, not yet, but a raw, stubborn refusal, kept her rooted to the spot. She had taught hundreds of students over 30 years, faced down angry parents in parent-teacher conferences, fought for funding for art programs, and navigated the profound loneliness of widowhood. She had survived. She could survive this too. She would not let them see her run. Still, as the elegant laughter of the guests drifted around her, she felt like a misplaced page in someone else's story, a paragraph that didn't quite fit the narrative, but hadn't yet been edited out. She walked slowly toward the vast white reception tent, her heels sinking into the soft manicured grass with each step. The sun was a dying ember behind the mountains, painting the sky in breathtaking strokes of gold, lilac, and deep rose. The view was so beautiful it was almost painful, and for a piercing moment she ached for someone, anyone, to share it with. Someone who would see the same softening light and remember this moment with her. At the entrance to the glowing tent, a waiter in a crisp white jacket stopped her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you with the Blackwood party or the Patterson side?" "The Patterson side," she said, the words feeling foreign and insignificant on her tongue. He hesitated, his eyes scanning a list on a small podium. There might have been a last-minute seating adjustment. Let me check." Of course there was. While he scanned the paper, his brow furrowed. Eleanor stood perfectly still, feeling the glances of other guests brush past her like a cold wind. She realized then that the deepest humiliation didn't always come from active cruelty. Sometimes it came from this: sheer, unadulterated indifference. The way people could look straight through you, their gaze slipping off you as if you were already transparent, as if you'd already faded from the frame of their lives. Finally, he looked up, his expression apologetic but firm. "You can take any open seat near the back wall, ma'am." "Any open seat." She nodded, a mechanical movement. "Thank you," she murmured and walked into the roaring heart of the reception. The contrast was jarring. The tent was a cathedral of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting 1,000 tiny rainbows across the room. Round tables were draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece a towering explosion of white orchids and roses. The air was thick with the competing scents of champagne, lilac, and roasted meat. A band played a soft jazz standard, but it was nearly drowned out by the crescendo of laughter and conversation. It was a world of vibrant, thrumming life from which she felt utterly excluded. She found a small empty table tucked behind a pillar near the kitchen entrance. It was, as promised, at the very back, the family table. She pulled out a chair and sat, folding her hands in her lap to still their slight tremor. She would stay for one drink. She would make an appearance. She would be the good mother, the uncomplicated guest. Then she would slip away. Somewhere between the beautiful alien flowers and the deafening noise of belonging, a quiet, fierce promise settled within her. A seed taking root in barren soil. This won't be the story they remember. This won't be the last page of me. And just as that thought solidified, a voice, calm, deep, and impossibly familiar, spoke beside her, cutting through the din as if it were silence. "Act like you're with me." Eleanor turned, startled. The voice was not one she recognized from her present life, yet it resonated with a strange, deep-seated familiarity, like a melody heard in childhood and forgotten until now. He was standing there, A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit that spoke of quiet money and exquisite taste. His hair was a distinguished silver, combed back from a strong, kind face, etched with the gentle lines of a well-lived life. His eyes were a warm, perceptive hazel, and they held an unreadable depth. He didn't look like a stranger who had stumbled upon the wrong table. He carried himself with the innate, quiet authority of a man who belonged everywhere he went, yet had chosen to be here, with her. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak. The chaos of the reception buzzed around them. The clinking glasses, the bursts of laughter, the swell of the band launching into a new song. But when he spoke, his voice created a pocket of stillness, a sanctuary around their small, isolated table. I said, "Act like you're with me." He repeated, softer this time. A gentle, unshakable command. She didn't know what made her obey. Perhaps it was the steadiness in his gaze, a rock in her churning sea of uncertainty. Perhaps it was the sheer, desperate loneliness of the day. Or perhaps it was a spark of the woman she used to be, the one who wasn't afraid to take a risk. But she found herself straightening her spine, squaring her shoulders, and offering a faint, practiced smile. She gave a slight regal nod, as if his presence was the most expected thing in the world. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The air around her shifted palpably. The guests at nearby tables who had previously looked through her now glanced their way, their expressions shifting from indifference to open curiosity. The whispers started again, but this time they were tinted with a new, speculative tone. Not pity, but cautious calculation. Who is he? Why is he with her? Across the room, Celeste, who had been holding forth to a captivated circle, froze, mid-sentence. Her polished social smile faltered and cracked, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated confusion as her eyes darted between Eleanor and the silver-haired man. It was the first crack Eleanor had seen in the woman's impeccable armor all day. The man leaned slightly toward her, his arm resting casually on the back of her chair, as if they were old, comfortable friends, as if this were their long-established ritual. "You look like you could use a friend," he murmured, his voice for her alone. Eleanor managed a small, shaky laugh. It was the first real sound she'd made in hours. That obvious? He smiled, and the crinkles at the corners of his eyes made him seem both wise and wonderfully approachable, only to someone who's felt the same way before. It was such a simple, unassuming statement, but it cut through the fog of isolation that had clung to her all day like a shroud. For hours, she had felt like a ghost at her own child's celebration, a spectator to her own life. But with this man beside her, his presence a calm, solid anchor in the storm, she felt seen. It was a feeling that warmed her from the inside, a gentle, radiant heat that reminded her she was still someone. She was Eleanor. Then she saw Brandon. He was across the room, his tie slightly loosened, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, laughing with a group of Vivian's sleek friends. But when his eyes, scanning the room, met hers, his laughter died on his lips. His gaze darted to the man beside her, then back to her. For the first time that day, his confident, groomly mask slipped, revealing a layer of pure, unvarnished uncertainty. Eleanor didn't look away. She held her son's gaze, her newfound stillness a stark contrast to his sudden disquiet. Vivian joined him, her expression sharp and tight. She whispered something urgent into his ear, her eyes cutting toward their table like daggers. Brandon shook his head, trying to brush it off, to reclaim his composure. But Eleanor saw it, the quick, telltale clench of his jaw, the faint flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. They were uncomfortable. They were off balance. A sharp, clean resentment rose in her, so potent it was almost tasteable. It wasn't that she wanted to embarrass them. It was that they had already embarrassed her. They had chosen to hide her, to treat her presence as a complication to be managed, a piece of outdated furniture to be tucked in a back room. And now, simply because someone was treating her as if she mattered, as if her presence was a value add rather than a detriment, they were squirming. The injustice of it was a clarion call. The stranger, Theo, she would later learn his name, reached for a glass of water from a passing tray and handed it to her. "You're shaking," he observed quietly. "I'm fine," she whispered, though she wasn't. Her chest ached with a volatile mix of old shame and this new, defiant energy. He studied her for a moment, his gaze so perceptive it felt like he was reading the story of her life written on her face. "Then let's make them believe that," he murmured. And so they sat. They sat together for what felt like both an eternity and a single suspended breath, talking softly about nothing of consequence. He asked about the food, the flowers, the music. They were ordinary, polite questions. But his tone, his genuine, focused attention, made it feel like a real conversation, not just the polite noise she'd been making all day. It grounded her. For the first time since arriving at this cursed estate, she wasn't a spectator or a problem. She was a participant. She was a woman having a conversation with an interesting man. The photographer, now circling the reception, capturing candid moments of joy, neared their table. Eleanor saw Celeste lean in and whisper to him, her eyes flicking pointedly in their direction. The photographer hesitated, his camera lowering slightly. Then, seemingly against his better judgment, he lifted it again, aiming the lens at their table. Theo smiled easily, turning his body slightly toward Eleanor, creating a more intimate, photogenic frame. "Smile," he said, his voice low and reassuring. And she did. It wasn't the forced, painful rictus from the ceremony. It was small, subtle, but it was real. It reached her eyes. The camera flash went off. A burst of light that felt like a benediction. In that moment, she felt a jolt of something powerful and reclaiming. It was proof, tangible, photographic proof that she existed in this story. That she was more than a forgotten footnote. That no one, not even her own son, could erase her completely. As the night wore on, she caught more glances. Some were politely curious, others were visibly unsettled. Celeste was whispering animatedly to her circle, her gestures sharp and frustrated. Eleanor could almost hear the questions buzzing through the room. Who is he? Where did she find him? Why is he with her? And for once, she didn't care. She sat straighter, her shoulders pulled back, her chin lifted. The quiet, unassailable confidence Theo exuded seemed to reflect onto her, warming parts of her soul that had been cold and dormant for years. This wasn't about pretending anymore. It was about remembering the woman she had been before life, and loss had taught her to make herself small, to apologize for taking up space. When the music shifted to a slow, melodic ballad, the kind that made couples sway dreamily on the dance floor, Theo stood and extended his hand. His gaze was steady, questioning, but not pressuring. "May I?" Eleanor's eyes instinctively sought out Brandon. He was standing with Vivian near the cake, his face a frozen mask of politeness, caught between social expectation and a personal confusion he couldn't hide. Vivian's gaze was averted, her posture rigid with disapproval, so... Eleanor looked back at Theo's outstretched hand. It represented a choice: to stay in the safe, miserable shadows, or to step into the light. Consequences be damned. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm. She placed her hand in his. He led her to the edge of the dance floor. They didn't move much, just a slow, gentle sway. His hand a warm, steady pressure on the small of her back, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic, passionate dance. It was a statement. People watched, but for the first time all day, she didn't feel exposed or judged. She felt steady, seen, alive. His presence was a shield and a solace. She caught a glimpse of herself in a mirrored pillar, a woman in a simple navy dress, dancing with a handsome, silver-haired man, her head held high, a faint, serene smile on her lips. She barely recognized the woman in the reflection, but she liked her. When the song ended, he guided her back to her seat, his hand a steadying presence at her elbow. "You did beautifully," he said, a genuine, warm grin touching his lips. Her smile was tremulous but utterly real. You have no idea how much I needed that. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened, a layer of his own carefully maintained guard coming down. "Maybe I do," he said, his voice barely a whisper, laden with a history she couldn't yet decipher. Before she could ask what he meant, the MC called for the couple to cut the cake, and the crowd surged forward in a wave of anticipation. Theo's hand brushed against hers once, lightly, a silent, fleeting reassurance that sent a current of warmth up her arm. She didn't know who he was or why he had chosen her. All she knew was that, for the first time in years, she felt like more than someone's forgotten mother, more than a widow, more than a retired teacher. She felt like Eleanor, and she wasn't about to let that feeling go. The reception was winding down. The cake had been cut, the speeches made, the first of the guests beginning to drift toward the terrace for air or toward the valet to leave. The energy was softening, decaying from a fever pitch of celebration into a warm, weary glow. Theo and I walked side by side out of the main tent, the roaring noise fading into a muffled, distant hum behind us. The grand hallway of the estate was quieter. The lights turned lower, the air scented with pine from the open terrace doors. For the first time all day, I could take a full, deep breath that didn't feel like it was catching on a hook of anxiety in my chest. He led me outside to the vast stone terrace that overlooked the dark, sleeping silhouette of the mountains. The sun was long gone, leaving only a faint memory of orange and magenta smudged along the western horizon. I leaned against the cold, solid iron railing, letting the cool, thin mountain air fill my lungs, cleansing me from the inside out. He stood beside me, a silent, steady presence, allowing the quiet to settle between us. It wasn't an awkward silence, but a comfortable, shared peace. "You handled yourself with grace in there," he said finally, his voice blending seamlessly with the chirping of crickets and the sigh of the wind through the pines. "I tried," I replied, the words feeling inadequate to describe the internal war I had just fought and, miraculously, won. "You did more than try," he countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You reminded them who you are." I wanted to believe him, to clutch his words to my heart and let them heal me. But decades of silence, of compromise, of making myself smaller to make others more comfortable, had made doubt a deeply ingrained habit, a default setting. I looked down at my hands, pale and faintly veined against the dark wrought iron railing. "You don't know who I am," I said softly, the statement meant for myself as much as for him. He smiled, just a faint knowing curve of his lips in the dim light. "Don't I?" There was something in his tone, a calm, unshakable certainty, an intimacy that defied the fact we had only just met, that made me turn to face him. His eyes met mine, and in the dim, reflected light from the estate, I felt a sudden, dizzying sense of dislocation, as if time had folded in on itself. That particular shade of hazel flecked with green and gold, the way he held my gaze with a gentle intensity, it pulled at a single fragile thread of memory buried deep inside me. A thread I hadn't touched, hadn't even dared to look for, in half a century. He took a small step closer, closing the distance between us. The sounds of the fading party seemed to vanish entirely. "Eleanor," he said, and my name on his lips didn't sound like a name he'd just learned. It sounded like a forgotten song, a melody from a summer-long past. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" My breath caught in my throat, lodging there like a stone. A strange, wild hope, terrifying in its intensity, began to bloom in my chest. "Should I?" Slowly, never breaking eye contact, he reached into the inner pocket of his exquisitely tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small, worn silver lighter. It was an old-fashioned thing, the kind a man from a different era might carry. The initials engraved on the side were faded from decades of use, from being held and turned over in a pocket. But they were still visible in the terrace light. TB. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It seemed to stop entirely, to freeze solid in my chest, before hammering against my ribs like a wild bird. I hadn't seen that lighter since I was 18 years old. The world tilted on its axis, the mountains swaying in my vision, and I gripped the cold iron railing to steady myself. The past didn't just rush back, it crashed over me, a tidal wave of memory and lost time. Theo Blackwood, I whispered, the name a ghost on my lips, a relic from a life I thought I'd dreamed. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine, filled with a complex mixture of sadness, joy, and weary triumph. You remember? I felt the ground shift irrevocably beneath my feet. Theo, the boy I'd loved with the fierce, untamed, all-consuming passion of youth. The boy I'd met by the river every stolen afternoon of those long, hot summers, who'd read Byron and Whitman, and dreamed of building bridges that would touch the clouds. The boy whose letters, written in his sprawling, eager hand, had stopped arriving one autumn, leaving a silence I had interpreted as abandonment, as proof that I wasn't enough. The boy my mother had called unsuitable. Not because he lacked, but because his old money family had too much power, too much influence, and not nearly enough of the humble, middle-class humility she valued above all else. I thought you forgot me, I said, my voice thin and reedy, the voice of the heartbroken girl I'd once been. I thought you just stopped writing, that you'd moved on to someone more suitable. I wrote Eleanor, he said, his voice heavy with a pain that had clearly been carried, carefully preserved for decades. Every week, for a year, I filled notebooks with letters to you. When you never replied, I thought you'd changed your mind. I thought you didn't want me, that I had imagined what we had. The air left my lungs in a rush. I could see it so clearly now, the memory sharp and painful as a shard of glass. My mother's perfect looping script on the envelopes she always collected from the mailbox. Her constant cloying insistence. You're too young for distractions, Ellie. Let me handle the mail. You need to focus on your future. The truth, cold and brutal and devastating, settled in the pit of my stomach. She hadn't just disapproved. She had orchestrated. She had destroyed. She never gave me your letters, I said, the words tasting like ash, like the dust of decades-old betrayal. She must have destroyed them all. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. A man finally receiving the confirmation of a long-held, painful suspicion. I figured it was something like that. I came back for you once a few years later. I drove to your house, my heart in my throat. But it was empty. The neighbors said your family had moved, that you'd gone away to college back east. I thought you'd moved on, built a new life without me, and wanted nothing to do with the past. Tears blurred my vision, making the terrace lights swim in starburst halos. All this time, I thought you forgot. I built a whole life on the assumption that I must not have meant very much to you, that our love was just a summer fling to you. He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and firm, solid and real, anchoring me to this impossible present. You meant everything, he said, the simplicity of the statement giving it the weight of a vow. The impact of those two words was seismic. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, how different my life could have been. The paths not taken stretched out before me in a dizzying array of might-have-beens. How one person's manipulation, one simple, cruel lie, could reroute the entire trajectory of a life, could steer it away from sunlit meadows and into a quieter, lonelier valley. The quiet resentment I'd carried for my mother, for all her controlling ways and her suffocating pride, flared into a white-hot rage. She hadn't just stolen letters. She had stolen time. She had stolen a future. She had stolen Theo from me. I could have yelled, I said softly, the rage simmering beneath the words, a dormant volcano awakening. I could have fought her. I could have demanded the truth, but I chose silence. I chose to be the good daughter, for her, later for my son, for everyone who ever told me that keeping the peace was more important than speaking my truth. Theo studied me, his gaze seeing through the fragile composure to the raw, grieving woman beneath. He saw the decades of quiet compromise. "And where did that silence get you?" he asked, not with judgment, but with a profound, heartbreaking gentleness. I didn't need to answer. The truth was written all over this day, in the back row of the wedding, in the dismissive glances, in the feeling of being a ghost in my own life. My silence had become my prison, and I had been the one dutifully locking the door each night. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind whispered through the tall, dark pines surrounding the estate, a sound that had always reminded me of loneliness, of long drives after Michael's funeral, of quiet evenings spent grading papers at my kitchen table, the silence of the apartment a physical presence. I had learned to live without being seen, to accept a smaller, quieter version of myself. Finally, I said, "You shouldn't have come today." It was a protest, a feeble attempt to push against the overwhelming tide of fate. "Maybe not," he replied, his voice so gentle it almost broke me. "But I'm glad I did." His voice was softer now, but his eyes still held that core of strength I remembered from a lifetime ago. He hadn't come to rescue me. I saw that now with stunning clarity. He had come to remind me that I never needed rescuing in the first place. He had come to hand me the key to my own prison door. Behind us, laughter and the clatter of cleanup drifted out from the ballroom. I turned and saw Brandon standing in the doorway watching us. Vivian was beside him, her arm linked possessively through his, her expression tight and unreadable. Brandon looked like a man torn in two, caught between the polished, powerful life he'd built and the simpler, truer one that had built him. He approached slowly, his steps hesitant on the stone as if walking a tightrope. "Mom," he said, his voice low, cautious. "You've been out here a while. Everything okay?" I met his gaze squarely, a new, unshakable strength flowing through me, fed by the truth Theo had returned to me. "Better than okay," I said, and I meant it. His eyes flickered to Theo, a flash of unease and something else. Confusion. Maybe even a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. In their depths. "I didn't realize you knew anyone here." "I didn't," I said calmly. The truth now. My weapon and my shield. Until today. Vivian joined him, forcing a smile that was a masterpiece of social artifice, not reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "We were just wondering if you'd like to take a family picture before the photographer leaves. For the album." She gestured vaguely towards the inside. "We realized we don't have any good ones with you from today." The irony was so sharp and profound it was almost laughable. Hours ago, they had hidden me in the shadows, tucked me behind the floral arrangements. Now, because of Theo's presence, because people had started whispering, because the dynamic had shifted, they wanted me in the frame. Not for love, not for family, but for appearances. To paper over the crack their dismissal had created. To present a picture-perfect family tableau to the world. I could have said yes. I could have slipped back into the well-worn role of the compliant mother, smoothed everything over with my silence, given them the photograph that would absolve them of their guilt. But that woman was gone. She had been erased as effectively as I had been erased from the front row, and in her place stood someone new. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the terrace. "But I think I'll pass. I have everything I need right here." Vivian blinked, visibly taken aback, her social script failing her. Brandon's face fell, confusion warring with a dawning hot embarrassment. He opened his mouth to speak, to cajole or command, then closed it again, his jaw working. For the first time that day, he had no script, no polite platitude to fall back on. He was a little boy again, caught doing something wrong. After an awkward, heavy moment, they turned and walked away. The silence they left behind sharper, more telling, and more final than any argument could ever have been. Theo looked at me, a quiet, fierce pride shining in his expression. "That was brave," he said. "It shouldn't have to be," I said, a wave of weariness for the world's injustices washing over me. "But I suppose it is," he offered a gentle, understanding smile. "Then let this be your start." We stood there as the first brave stars pricked the darkening velvet of the sky, the last of the music and laughter from the wedding finally fading into a profound silence. I felt lighter, though not with a simple, giddy happiness. This was something quieter, more profound, more durable. It was the feeling of standing up straight after a lifetime of bowing. It was the feeling of taking a full, deep breath after years of shallow, anxious ones. When the night wind brushed against my cheek, I realized the resentment I carried. For Brandon, for Vivian, for my mother, was still there, but it was no longer in the driver's seat. It was no longer a poison in my veins. It was just a part of my story, a dark chapter, but not the ending. Theo's hand found mine again, his touch a grounding, solid warmth in the cooling night. "You were always stronger than they saw," he said. And for the first time in years, I truly, deeply, completely believed it. The morning after the wedding, Eleanor woke to the gentle, insistent press of Colorado sunlight through the thin cotton curtains of her small familiar apartment. The silence that greeted her was heavy, but it was a calm, clean heaviness, like the world had finally exhaled and stopped demanding things from her. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car alarm, the ordinary music of her own life. Her navy dress hung neatly over the back of the reading chair where Michael had spent his final evenings. She rose and ran her fingers over the fabric, not with shame or regret, but with a sense of reverence. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was her armor, and it had served her well. It was a relic from the battle she had not only survived, but won. She made a single cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen, and sat by the window, watching the world go about its Saturday morning business. Dogs were walked, newspapers were retrieved from dew-damp lawns. Lives were lived with unassuming normalcy. For the first time in memory, she felt no urgent, clawing need to call, to explain, to apologize for her existence. The deep-seated compulsion to smooth things over, a habit etched into her bones by decades of being the peacemaker, the buffer, the absorber of friction, had simply vanished. She owed no one an explanation. The truth, once found, was its own justification. Her mind kept returning to Theo, the steadiness of his voice, the shocking, comforting familiarity of his touch, the sheer, unbelievable narrative twist of his appearance. It felt like a story she would have read to her more romantic senior students. A tale of fate and second chances that they would have sighed over. Yet, the memory of his hand on hers, the look in his eyes when he said, "You meant everything," was as real and solid as the warm ceramic mug she held between her palms. Her phone buzzed on the small oak table, vibrating against the wood with an aggressive urgency. Brandon's name flashed on the screen, a digital summons. Her hand hovered, a lifetime of conditioning, a neural pathway worn deep with guilt and responsibility, screamed at her to answer, to soothe, to fix. But the new, quieter, stronger voice inside, the one Theo had helped her unearth, held her hand still. She watched the screen until it went dark, the voicemail icon appearing. A moment later, it rang again, and again. The insistence was a language in itself, one of control and expectation. Finally, a text message appeared, the letters stark and demanding against the bright screen. "Brandon, Mom, we need to talk. Vivian's upset. She said you embarrassed her." She read the words twice, letting them settle. Embarrassed her, after everything. The back row, the folding chair, the whispered slights, the deliberate invisibility, the systemic erasure. She was the one who had caused embarrassment. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it should have made her angry. It should have ignited the fury she had felt on the terrace. But instead, it just solidified her resolve. hardening it into something cold and unyielding. She set the phone down face up, a deliberate act, and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. There was a time just yesterday, in fact, when a message like that would have sent her into a spiral of anxious apologies and frantic self-recrimination. Now, it only evoked a profound, weary sadness for the small, image-obsessed world they inhabited. A second message chimed, a petulant sound. Brandon. Please call me back. People are talking. A small wry smile touched her lips. People are talking, as if that were the ultimate sin, the final metric of failure in their social universe. She had spent her entire life ensuring people wouldn't talk, that she wouldn't cause a scene, that she would be easy, uncomplicated and accommodating. And where had it gotten her? Seated behind a column at her only son's wedding, a piece of forgotten history. She was done living by their rules. She didn't answer. She finished her coffee, washed the mug, and placed it neatly in the drying rack. The simple domestic ritual felt like a reclamation of her own space, her own time. Later that afternoon, as the light began to soften and stretch the shadows across her living room rug, an email notification popped up on her tablet. It wasn't from Brandon or Vivian. The sender name was Melissa Carter, a name that tugged at a distant, dusty corner of her memory. One of her former students from over 20 years ago. A quiet, mousy girl who had blossomed in her AP English class, finding her voice in the pages of Austen and Bronte. Mrs. Patterson, the email began. I hope this finds you well. This might seem out of the blue, but I saw a photo of you online from a wedding yesterday. A friend of a friend posted it. You look so confident and serene. I just wanted to write and thank you. You were the first teacher, the first person really. Whoever looked at me and believed I could be more than what my circumstances said I was. You told me my writing had a voice, a soul. I'm a senior editor at a publishing house now. I think of you often, especially when I'm championing a new, unsure author. I hope life has been as kind to you as you were to me. All the best, Melissa. Eleanor stared at the message, her chest tightening not with pain, but with a gratitude so fierce and overwhelming, it brought fresh, cleansing tears to her eyes. That photo, the one Celeste had tried to prevent, the one Vivian was now embarrassed by, had found its way into the world, and somehow it had served as a beacon, a reminder of a connection she had long forgotten, of a life of impact that existed entirely outside the confines of that wedding tent. It was proof, more powerful than any argument, that she hadn't been erased. Her life, her influence, her very essence, had rippled out into the world in ways she could never have imagined, touching and shaping other lives. She mattered. That evening, as she was watering her spider plant, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Vivian. The message was short, brutal, and devoid of any pretense of civility or familial bond. It was a command from a CEO to a subordinate, Vivian. You've caused enough tension. Please stay away for a while. Brandon needs space. The resentment rose then, a hot, familiar tide she now recognized not as a weakness, but as a righteous signal. She had spent a lifetime being told to make herself smaller, quieter, less present, so that others could be more comfortable. She had contorted herself to fit into the boxes others had built for her, sanding down her own edges until she barely recognized her own shape. But she was done. She was finished with shrinking. The space she would take up now was her own, and it was non-negotiable. She didn't reply. Instead, her thumb moved with a calm, decisive finality. She deleted the message. Then, she finished watering her plant, wiped the base of the pot, and sat in the growing dark until the hot, sharp anger cooled and tempered into something hard, durable and useful. Resolve. A few hours later, as she was preparing for bed, Brandon's final text came through. This one was the deepest cut, aimed with the unerring accuracy of a child who knows exactly which buttons to push. Brandon. Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. You're breaking the family apart. That one hurt. It cut deeper than Vivian's coldness, deeper than the back row. It struck at the very core of her identity as a mother, the role she had cherished above all others. She placed the phone face down on her nightstand, the screen against the wood, a symbolic silencing. She let the tears come then, sitting on the edge of her bed. She didn't cry out of guilt, but out of a bone-deep exhaustion. She had carried the weight of that family for so long, buffering every conflict, absorbing every slight, softening every hard edge, all to keep the fragile vessel of their unit afloat. And yet, she was the one accused of breaking it. The injustice of it was a physical ache, a hollowing out of all the sacrifices she had so willingly made. When the tears subsided, leaving her raw and empty, she stood and walked to the bathroom, flicking on the light. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who stared back had swollen eyes and a face pale with fatigue. But there was something new in her gaze, a glint of steel that hadn't been there before, a light that no amount of weeping could extinguish. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that wedding, desperate for a scrap of acknowledgement. She was a woman who had built a life of her own before, a life of meaning and purpose in a classroom full of children who needed her. She had done it once. She could build it again. The next morning, she drove to a small, independent bookstore downtown, a place she hadn't visited in years. It was quiet, smelling of old paper, binding glue, and polished wood. She bought a simple, beautiful linen-bound notebook and a smooth writing pen that felt substantial in her hand. She found a corner table by a window that looked out onto a busy street and sat down, the morning sun warm on her back. She opened the notebook to the first pristine page. The blank whiteness was both intimidating and full of promise. "Dear Theo," she wrote. She didn't know if she would ever send the letter, but it felt essential to begin, to give shape to the whirlwind inside her. The words started slowly, then began to flow. A quiet river finding its course after a long drought. She wrote about the back row, the cold metal of the chair, the way his voice had cut through the noise of her own despair. She wrote about the dance, the feeling of his hand on her back, a guide and a support. She wrote about the startling moment of recognition on the terrace, the world tilting, the worn silver lighter, the decades of silence, and the shocking truth of her mother's betrayal. As she wrote, something fundamental shifted and settled inside her. The resentment she carried for Brandon and Vivian was still present, a dark thread in the tapestry. But it had transmuted. It was no longer a burning, uncontrolled fire of hurt. It was a steady, reliable fuel. It reminded her to keep living, to keep choosing her own dignity over their comfort, to keep writing her own story, word by deliberate word. Outside, the sun began its descent, painting the Denver skyline in shades of amber and rose. She packed her things, the notebook held close to her chest like a cherished secret, and stepped out into the evening. The city hummed around her, alive and beautifully indifferent, full of its own countless stories and possibilities. She felt a part of it again, no longer isolated in her bubble of hurt. When she reached her apartment, she made tea and opened the window to let in the cool, night air, scented with distant rain. The phone stayed silent on the table. For the first time in a very, very long time, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. It felt like power. She thought of Theo's voice on the terrace, calm and certain. You reminded them who you are. Maybe that was the entire point of the painful, beautiful, chaotic day. Not to reunite with a lost love, not to punish her son, but to perform the ultimate act of remembrance, to remember herself. As the sky deepened to indigo and the first stars appeared, pinpricks of brave light in the vastness, Eleanor Patterson whispered a promise into the welcoming stillness of her home. "I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore," she said, her voice firm and clear in the quiet room. "Even when it hurts, even when it costs me." And then she smiled, a real, full, unburdened smile that started in her heart and reached her eyes, because for the first time in years, she knew exactly who she was. She was Eleanor Patterson, a teacher, a widow, a mother, A woman who had been loved deeply, lost profoundly, and was now, finally, found. And she was no longer invisible. If you have similar story to please like and subscribe to my channel and comment where you are watching from. Thanks for watching and listening to my story.